They erected buildings of glass and steel, buildings that became monuments to solidity, to unwavering stability, at the center of every metropolis. These cathedrals of capital were the promise, materialized. Here, your future is safe. Here, your work is protected. They promised security. They promised trust. They promised to protect your money, your dreams, your family's legacy. The names were synonymous with responsibility. Banco Ambrosiano, the pride of Italy, BCCI, a global force in 70 countries, the savings and loans, the backbone of the American community, institutions that operated with the weight of history and the guarantee of the government. People trusted them and handed over not just their savings, but their peace of mind. But there is an unwritten rule in the underworld of high-risk finance. The bigger the fawade, the deeper the darkness it hides, and the collapse, when it comes, is not an earthquake. It's a complete disappearance, and that is the most shocking part. The disappearance is always silent. One morning, the news wasn't about a merger or an acquisition, but about an emptiness. The doors were locked. The phones went unanswered. Paper notes affixed to the brass gates announced that the institution had entered into special administration, a cold, technical word that translated into a personal catastrophe for millions. A lifetime of savings, retirement funds, small business capital, money for their children's college. It was gone, not stolen by mass thieves with guns, but by white-collar bureaucrats with golden pens from Europe to Asia, from the shadowy corridors of Wall Street to the paradise islands of the Caribbean. These gigantic financial institutions simply evaporated, with everything in tow. This is the account of the banks that vanished, leaving behind only the echo of broken promises and the certainty that, in the world of high finance, trust is the most dangerous asset you can deposit. Let's dive into the history of the money that, quite literally, ceased to exist. Case 1. Banco Ambrosiano, the Bank of God. Italy in the 1980s was not just the land of fashion design and luxury cars. It was a melting pot where the power of the church, political fervor, and the organized crime underworld met in a dangerous dance. At the center of this maelstrom stood Banco Ambrosiano. It was not just a financial institution, it was a symbol of power, so intertwined with the spiritual power of the country that it earned the nickname Goddess Bank. Its influence extended beyond business, reaching the marble corridors of the Vatican, the offices of power in Rome, and inevitably, the secret tables of the Italian mafia. Its chairman, Roberto Calvi, was a man of austere countenance, known in the inner circles of Milan as Il Banchier di Dio, the banker of God. Calvi didn't manage a bank, he managed an empire of connections. But behind the facade of austerity and respectability, behind the marble-lined halls and the polished steel vaults, one of the biggest frauds in modern history was unfolding. Banco Ambrosiano was, in reality, a financial labyrinth, a complex contraption designed not to protect deposits, but to divert them. Calvi and his associates created a network of over 120 shell companies that stretched across tax havens like Panama, the Bahamas, and Switzerland. These companies had a single purpose: to act as intermediaries for granting colossal secret loans. We are talking about unsecured, unregistered loans, transfers of billions of lira and dollars that simply disappeared into the offshore fog, often intended to finance shadowy operations, including those of the mafia, or simply to cover previous holes. The money, which theoretically belonged to clients and shareholders, was being used as a private fund, a zero-sum game where Calvi bet high. The spider's web connecting the bank to the Vatican was particularly toxic. The Institute for the Works of Religion, the Vatican Bank, was a key shareholder and an operational partner in the schemes. This connection offered Calvi a layer of diplomatic immunity and the illusion of invulnerability. Who would dare investigate God's bank? The inevitability of mathematics, however, is relentless. In 1982, the House of Cards collapsed. When regulators finally forced the books open, the Ambrosiano revealed a black hole that swallowed billions of dollars, an astronomical debt of $1.3 billion at the time, the equivalent of many billions today. It was a collapse that shook confidence in the global financial system and exposed corruption even in the highest spheres. The final and darkest chapter of this saga was the death of Roberto Calvi. In June 1982, shortly after the collapse was made public, his body was found hanging by a rope under Blackfriars Bridge in London. In his pockets, the police found bricks, over $15,000 in cash and various currencies, and a watch. The modus operandi hanging under Blackfriars Bridge, Blackfriars, Black Monks, and the Bricks was widely interpreted as a symbolic message from the mafia or Masonic groups involved in the scandal. The official verdict was, initially, suicide, but the presence of the bricks, an unnecessary weight for a suicide, and the bizarre circumstances led to multiple case reopenings. The most probable truth is that Colby was silenced to ensure that the names of powerful politicians, prelates, and criminals would not come to light. The money, it vanished into tax havens, absorbed by Calvi's network of shell companies, gone. The truth, it was literally hung under a bridge, buried. The only thing left was the smoke of a failed empire and the bitter lesson that, when you mix God's money with the mafia's money, the only winner is the darkness. Case 2. Banco Occidental, Colombia's most dangerous bank. We leave the marble halls and ecclesiastical secrets of Europe for the suffocating heat and palpable danger of 1980s Colombia. Here, power did not come from Rome, but from Medellin. And if Banco Ambrosiano was God's bank, the Banco de los Trabajadores of Colombia quickly became the cartel bank. The bitter irony lay in the name, supposedly created to serve the working class. This institution ended up being the engine of one of the most efficient and brutal money laundering machines the world has ever seen. It did not belong to workers. It belonged to Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel. In the golden years of drug trafficking, cocaine flooded the United States, generating a river of cash, suitcases upon suitcases of $20, $50, and $100 bills. With an unsustainable physical weight and an unmistakable smell, this illicit money was a burden. It could not simply be deposited in banks in Miami or New York without raising immediate suspicion. They needed a system that would take these piles of dirty cash and transform it into clean, unrecognizable assets, and Banco de los Trabajadores was the perfect solution. The scheme was audaciously simple, operating right under the nose of the Colombian government. Through a labyrinthine network of front accounts and lightning-fast bank transfers, millions were moved every day. The process began with the opening of accounts in the names of paper companies, often linked to legitimate sectors, such as flour imports or livestock. The money was then deposited into these accounts at branches in Bogotá and Cali. Next, using the bank's international network, the capital was sent to triangulation points Panama, the Cayman Islands, Miami. This triangulation, done in tranches below mandatory reporting limits, cleaned the money's trail, mixing it with legitimate funds before returning it to Colombia as clean foreign investment. Banco de los Trabajadores operated as a giant ultra-secret exchange house, ensuring that the millions generated by the cocaine kings were injected back into the economy, building luxury haciendas, financing political campaigns, and most importantly, sustaining the cartel's military power. Fear was the bank's most effective branch manager. Any attempt at internal investigation was quickly silenced through intimidation or, more often, violence. But, like Banco Ambrosiano, the fraud was too big to last. As U.S. drug enforcement agencies and Colombian investigators tightened the noose, and the evidence of massive cash deposits became undeniable, the cartel bank's time ran out. The collapse was not a slow bankruptcy, it was a coordinated implosion in a single night. Before the government could formally intervene to seize assets, the cartel acted. Reports from the Times speak of trucks discreetly arriving at the most important branches. Vaults were emptied at a surreal speed. Accounts were closed. Hard drives and physical records were destroyed or simply made to vanish. The money trail was erased with terrifying efficiency. The next morning, the customers, those real workers and honest citizens who used the bank for their honest savings, found the doors closed. There were no warnings. There were no explanations. Just a heavy, official silence that meant total loss. The cartel had taken everything, leaving the government with a ghost institution and the depositors with nothing but the certainty that their money had been sacrificed on the altar of drug trafficking. It was a disappearance that proved that sometimes the most dangerous bank is the one with no interest in state secrets or faith, but only in turning blood into gold. Case 3, BCCI, the bank that laundered the world. If you thought the previous scandals were black holes, this next one was a whole galaxy of darkness. Officially, it was the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or BCCI. Unofficially, it was the Bank of Crooks and Criminals International, founded in 1972. Its public mission was to help developing countries. Its secret mission, to create a financial empire above any law. BCCI was a financial hydra registered in multiple countries with offices in over 70 nations. It had no real headquarters. This was its greatest weapon, letting it move money between jurisdictions until the trail went cold, and it served everyone. Dictators like Saddam Hussein, drug lords, arms dealers, and even intelligence agencies like the CIA. It was the one-stop shop for global crime and espionage for nearly 2 decades. It operated as a global Ponzi scheme on an industrial scale. In 1991, regulators finally shut it down overnight. Across the world, the fallout was catastrophic. $20 billion vanished, just gone. The money was never fully recovered. Some say the bank never truly died. It just rebranded. Case for S&L collapse, the American black hole. After traveling through global empires of corruption, we return to America, to what was supposed to be the bedrock of financial trust, the small, local institutions. In the 1980s, Americans trusted their savings and loans over S&Ls, the local thrift banks. These were the community institutions, the small banks built for families to finance mortgages, to guard retirement savings. This wasn't Wall Street. This was Main Street. But what happened in the late 70s and early 80s proved that greed knows no borders or size. One keyword came into play: deregulation. The government, pressured by lobbyists, began to ease the restrictions that kept S&Ls focused on low-risk home lending. Suddenly, these small institutions were allowed to venture into high-risk investments, speculating in commercial real estate and junk bonds. It was like handing the keys to a race car to a teenager, without the strict oversight they were accustomed to. Hundreds of S&Ls saw an opportunity for quick wealth. Bankers, used to dealing with secure mortgages, were seduced by the glitter of speculation. They began to grant reckless loans to dubious real estate developers, investing in phantom projects, and using customer deposits, the hard-earned savings of families, as gambling capital. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was outright fraud. Many of the S&L owners and executives were engaging in insider fraud schemes, granting loans to themselves or their friends with no intention of repayment. They were emptying the institution from the inside out. For example, Charles Keating's Lincoln Savings and Loan became the symbol of the scandal. Keating used customer deposits, many from the elderly, to finance a luxury lifestyle and highly risky investments that enriched him and his associates, all while deceiving depositors with the promise of high returns. When the real estate and high-yield bond markets inevitably cooled, the house of cards collapsed with overwhelming ferocity. It was not an isolated collapse, like that of a single mafia bank. It was an epidemic of failures. More than 1,000 institutions, 1,043 banks went bust. The S&L collapse wiped out an entire financial sector, deeply hitting American consumer confidence. Savings disappeared. The U.S. government was forced to intervene to honor insured deposits and clean up the mess. The final cost of the bailout, estimates vary, but the burden on the American taxpayer was astronomical, in the range of $160 billion. One of the largest financial rescue operations in U.S. history up to that point. And herein lies the outrage. Thousands of families lost everything. Trust in the system was destroyed, and the taxpayer footed the bill. The bankers, many of the executives responsible for the fraud, and rampant speculation, including Charles Keating, did face prosecution, yes. But many others walked away unpunished, their personal fortunes intact, bought with the money that should have been safe in community thrift banks. The S&L collapse proved that, sometimes, the biggest financial black hole is not in Europe or Colombia, but right behind the door of a family bank in your own town, opened by the promise that deregulated greed would pay off. Banco Ambrosiano, God's Bank, which financed the mafia and saw its leader hanging from a bridge in London. Banco Occidental, the cartel bank, which laundered cocaine millions and vanished in a single night of criminal fury. BCCI, the global hydra that serviced dictators and terrorists across 70 countries and made $20 billion disappear from the face of the earth. And finally, the savings and loans, the American scandal of domestic greed that cost taxpayers a fortune and caused over 1,000 institutions to implode. For cases, for continents, different schemes, yes, different currencies, different eras, but invariably, the same ending. All of them were institutions of trust. They received the most valuable asset we can offer, our faith in the system. But trust, in the world of high finance, is often just a veil, a carefully constructed facade, behind which greed operates without limits. Their greatest weapon was not the fraud itself, but the certainty that, due to their size and political connections. They would be considered too big to fail or too powerful to investigate. They operated under the predator's maxim, the biggest theft is the most invisible, because in the financial world, the largest heists are not executed with ski masks or firearms. They are done with polished marble floors, solid gold pens, and the most perfect, impeccable smiles imaginable. They are thefts executed by men who never dirty their hands, only the ledgers. Money can vanish, entire banks can fade into the fog of fraud, but the lesson, my friends, is eternal. Echoing from the bridges of London to the deserts of tax havens, the security your soul is often just an illusion. The cautious investor's maxim must be, the safest place for your fortune may not be a bank. True security lies in knowledge and distrust. Never trust blindly. Never accept that the system is infallible. And now, we want to hear from you. Are these for pillars of fraud and collapse Ambrosiano, Occidental, BCCI, S and LS, which one shocked you the most due to its audacity or its consequences? Comment below and share your thoughts on the risk of trust in large institutions. If this journey through hidden fortunes and evaporated banks has awakened your investigative side, leave your like to help us expose more stories like this and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell to not miss our next dive into the mysteries of wealth and power here on the Hidden Hoards Files.